คุณผู้ชมคิดว่าเรากำลังก้าวไปสู่อนาคตที่โลกน่าอยู่ขึ้นหรือกำลังเดินถอยหลังเข้าใกล้หายนะกันแน่เพียงเดือนที่ผ่านมากลุ่มนักวิทยาศาสตร์ผู้จัดทำนาฬิกาวันสิ้นโลกหรือ Doomsday Clock ได้ขยับเข็มมาอยู่ที่ 85 วินาทีก่อนเที่ยงคืนเที่ยงคืนในที่นี้ไม่ใช่เวลาจริงแต่เป็นสัญลักษณ์ของจุดวิกฤตระดับโลกและตัวเลขนี้สะท้อนว่าโลกกำลังอยู่ในระดับความเสี่ยงที่ใกล้หายนะที่สุดนับตั้งแต่เริ่มใช้นาฬิกานี้ในยุคสงครามเย็นนักวิทยาศาสตร์ชี้ว่าความเสี่ยงที่มนุษย์สร้างเองทั้งความขัดแย้งภูมิอากาศและเทคโนโลยีกำลังซ้อนทับกันท่ามกลางโลกรวนและความไม่แน่นอนของเกมมหาอำนาจคำถามใหญ่ไม่ใช่แค่ใครชนะแต่คือโลกจะอยู่รอดอย่างไรและหนึ่งในโจทย์ที่ตัดกันพอดีคือพลังงานเมื่อโลกต้องลดคาร์บอนแต่ก็ต้องมีไฟฟ้าที่เสถียรพอสำหรับเศรษฐกิจยุคใหม่โดยเฉพาะ AI และ Data Center ที่ใช้พลังงานมหาศาลพลังงานที่เคยเป็นฝันร้ายอย่างนิวเคลียร์จึงถูกปลุกกลับมาเป็นหนึ่งในทางเลือกของการเปลี่ยนผ่านพลังงานสะอาดแต่พลังงานที่เคยสร้างหายนะครั้งใหญ่ในประวัติศาสตร์จะเป็นทางรอดของโลกจริงๆหรือไม่
These accidents probably can't happen again. The Chernobyl one actually cannot happen again by law in any country. The design of the Chernobyl reactor was fundamentally unsafe in the beginning, but we had no control over the way the Soviet Union designed their reactors. It's scary to do something that has risks, but the biggest risk we can take is to do nothing. It's called inaction bias, and it's the fallacy or the false belief that if I do nothing, it's better. But if we do nothing about the energy crisis, we know what's going to happen. We're going to burn fossil fuel. We're going to have millions of deaths a year attributable to CO2 and pollution, and it's only going to get worse.
คุณผู้ชมคะในโลกปัจจุบันที่กำลังพูดถึงการพัฒนาพลังงานสะอาดให้มากขึ้นพลังงานนิวเคลียร์ก็เป็นอีกหนึ่งแนวโน้มที่เกิดขึ้นแล้วนะคะแต่ว่าหลายๆประเทศอาจจะกังวลกันมากว่าปลอดภัยมากน้อยขนาดไหนเต็มไปด้วยความเสี่ยงหรือไม่วันนี้ The World Dialogue จะคุยกับนักวิชาการนักวิจัยที่ทำงานด้านนิวเคลียร์มาอย่างยาวนานนะคะที่เชื่อมั่นอย่างมากในพลังงานนิวเคลียร์ว่าเป็นพลังงานแห่งอนาคตวันนี้ดิฉันจะคุยกับ Professor Short แห่งสถาบัน MIT ค่ะว่าทำไมถึงเชื่อมั่นในพลังงานนิวเคลียร์ค่ะTalking about nuclear, people tend to think about Chernobyl or Fukushima. But as a nuclear scientist, what do you like to tell the public who are still terrified by nuclear from the 80s?
Well, I'd say first keep in mind that the first thing people think about when you say nuclear is either bombs or accidents, because that's what happens in the media. That's what everybody hears about. But these accidents probably can't happen again. The Chernobyl one actually cannot happen again by law in any country.The design of the Chernobyl reactor was fundamentally unsafe in the beginning, but we had no control over the way the Soviet Union designed their reactors. First of all, they never built a containment dome, which means that if everything else goes wrong, they had no structure to keep everything in. That's not allowed in any other country, including now former Soviet countries, also not allowed. Two, there was something called positive feedback, which is not allowed. That means that if the reactor power gets higher,it should naturally shut itself down. And that's how reactors operate today. If the fuel gets too hot, that the reaction shuts down and it helps cool the fuel down instantly. But the Chernobyl reactor, when the fuel got hotter, it got hotter and hotter and hotter in a runaway reaction. That's called positive feedback, and it's a bad thing. And so reactors are not allowed to be designed like this. This is one of the biggest factors in regulation of a reactor, is they check to make sure there's none of this positive feedback allowed.or not enough. Now, when it comes to Fukushima, one, this was a once every 1,000 years event. Like last time there was an earthquake this magnitude in Japan or a tsunami this big was something like, I remember hearing 800 years ago or something like that. And we know that because there are all these stones at certain markers that said, don't build below here because there's risk of tsunami or something to that degree. But we did, because we didn't heed the wisdom of people from hundreds of years ago.
ขณะที่โลกยังหวาดกลัวนิวเคลียร์ข้อมูลจาก Our World in Data ชี้ให้เห็นอีกด้านว่าพลังงานฟอสซิลที่โลกพึ่งพามานานสร้างความสูญเสียมากกว่าหลายร้อยเท่า มลพิษจากถ่านหินทำให้คนตายแบบผ่อนส่งจากโรคทางเดินหายใจปีละหลายล้านคนต่างจากนิวเคลียร์ที่ถูกจับจ้องตลอดเวลา
So the last thing I'll say is that every technology has risks, right? We have had 2 major nuclear accidents and they have been scary. But when you talk about how do you quantify the safety of an energy source, you have to speak in numbers. And I don't want to make it complicated. You have to weigh the good with the bad. The good is the power produced. The bad is the deaths and injuries caused. The more power and the less injuries, the better, right? So we actually have a metric. It's called deaths per terawatt hour, which means that if you have number of deaths by that power source, divide by power, the smaller this fraction, the better. Nuclear, wind, and solar have the same fraction, and it's the lowest of any energy source. So when you think about it that way, counting Chernobyl, counting Fukushima, nuclear is among the safest energy sources there is. The last thing I'll say is, yeah, it's scary to do something that has risks, but the biggest risk we can take is to do nothing. It's called inaction bias, and it's the fallacy or the false belief that if I do nothing, it's better. But if we do nothing about the energy crisis, we know what's going to happen. We're going to burn fossil fuels. We're going to have millions of deaths a year attributable to CO2 and pollution, and it's only going to get worse. If we take on nuclear and we have the same rate of accidents as we have had in the past, 1 every 30 years around the world, we're going to drastically reduce deaths and suffering. We can never make it zero, but we can make it as low as possible.
You like to tell the public to look at the positive side from the nuclear power in which the whole world can enjoy in addition to solar and wind energy.
Exactly.
Is that what you mean?
I would say every power source has a positive side and a negative side. And when people tend to think of nuclear, they tend to only think of the negative side because when there's a nuclear accident, it's a big deal. They cover it on the news for years. It affects the areas around for decades, right? Because the bigger the event, the bigger the news it is and the scarier it is. Nobody wants to be affected by any of those events. But at the end of the day, you have to look at the numbers. And you have to ask the question, which energy source is safer? And the answer to that question is which has the smaller fraction, deaths divided by power.
In order to develop nuclear power plant, safety must have come first.
Yep.
And what's the mechanism to ensure those safety to be like 100% to make sure that it's safe for people to have nuclear power plant near their home or near their neighborhood?
Well, I will say first, we can never reach 100%. We can try to, but we'll never get there. And it's the same with every other source of energy. Nuclear and solar have similar rates of deaths per terawatt hour. We all know where the deaths come from nuclear is the accidents. Where do you think the deaths come from solar? Where do you think? First of all, it's not that dangerous, right? But when you're installing solar panels, it's easy to fall off a roof or fall off the ladder. It's the installation. And so when you add up, the thing is those only happen one at a time, right? But a lot more of them happen every year than nuclear accidents. Solar accident, one person. Nuclear accident, hundreds or thousands of people, right? In Chernobyl, it's estimated between 4,000 and 11,000 people eventually died because of the cancers and other diseases caused from Chernobyl. But when you take, again, deaths divided by power, nuclear, wind, and solar come out the same within margins of uncertainty.
With current number of nuclear plants around the world, there are so many of them. In order to prevent disaster or disaster consequence, what should those nuclear power plants be changed in terms of the system?
So the systems themselves have been designed very well. The biggest danger from a nuclear plant which comes within is the culture and the environment we call human factors. Part of the cause of the Chernobyl accident was the positive feedback design. But part of the other cause was that junior operators were forced to listen to their senior superiors, even though they knew something was going to go wrong. That was the wrong attitude. In the US, at least, that attitude was erased in the 1990s. We say things like, have a questioning attitude. Anyone can be a whistleblower. If anyone sees anything wrong, they're protected in calling it out, even if it causes huge loss of money to the company. The law is now you have to be able to speak up.
Do you see, for you, the future is nuclear power as the clean energy? Why are you so committed to nuclear power? What makes you so sure about it?
I see nuclear as a necessary part of the solution. It's not the answer. So even though I've dedicated my life to getting nuclear power working, I would never recommend a country go 100% nuclear, or even 50%. To me, the strongest energy mix is a mix. It's diversity in energy. Because you avoid what's called common mode failures. It's the only big baseload source of power that every country could access. Not every country is like the US or Laos, where we have a huge amount of hydropower. Not every country is like Iceland, where you can just summon geothermal energy from under the ground. Things that you can build with resources that you can have or you can buy, that's like democratizing carbon-free energy. So I see it as a way for every country to have a large share of carbon-free baseload energy.
I'm sure you must have studied the current energy system in Thailand. What would be your recommendation that we shouldn't rely on one particular source of energy? So what do you see as the future of Thailand in terms of energy?
First of all, I hope the future of Thailand is to become an energy exporter instead of an energy importer. But without a lot of Thailand's own natural resources, that's not going to be possible, right? So right now, Thailand imports a lot of its oil and gas. And even with the prospective fields that could be harvested, it's still expected to be an importer. So that means that oil and gas alone, and even coal, are not going to cut it. So yes, it's a very sunny place, and we could expand a lot of solar power here. But at the end of the day, what happens if the sun doesn't shine for 10 days? You need some storage, but you also need materials and rare earth materials for that. You might need lithium, you might need rare earth metals for the electronics. It becomes pretty complicated. And so nuclear to me is just another one in the mix. Like maybe Thailand doesn't have a ton of uranium, but by diversifying its energy sources, you bring generation under your control. And there's a lot of national security in being able to generate your own energy. And especially if other nearby countries need to import some energy, then you can also sell that at a profit, like what France does for Germany.
It means that you would recommend Thailand to develop nuclear energy and export energy to other countries. That means Thailand needs to build nuclear power plant in the country.
I do. I think that Thailand does need to first develop the expertise in the workforce, do the technical due diligence to pick companies offering safe nuclear power plants or develop one of your own, because there's a lot of nuclear startups today. And, I'm an academic professor. Nobody lets me know what's happening inside the company. So while I don't know which company is building the best plants or not, somebody ought to be evaluating what's behind the fence, so to speak, what the proprietary stuff could tell you if that plant's going to work or not. In order to do that, Thailand needs to develop enough nuclear expertise to make those decisions, to perform its own analysis and its own regulation to trust which of these technologies could work. So the workforce comes first, then the knowledge comes next, and then the nuclear power could come, only when Thai people have decided it's safe.
If Thailand decides to go in that direction, what should Thailand do for now to achieve that outcome? And what would be good side and bad side of having nuclear power plant in the country?
So one of the best things to do is to work cooperatively with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. And as far as I've learned, that Thailand already meets many of the IAEA criteria for civilian nuclear power, but not all of them, but it's working on them. But I'd say the biggest thing now is to develop a nuclear workforce. And that doesn't mean people who just work at a power plant. It means people who can evaluate and analyze different designs. The good thing is you'll be growing your own nuclear experts, people you can trust that can communicate to your public in language they understand. The only bad side of developing a nuclear workforce is that you have smart people that aren't working in another industry. But Thailand has a lot of smart people. So I don't think there's any shortage of intellectual talent in this country. There's lots. In fact, my first PhD student was from Thailand. He's a brilliant guy, so I don't see a big risk there. I think it would also help to work with some of the bigger countries working on nuclear. For example, I can speak from the US side. We have these agreements we sign with countries called 8123 agreements, where we share more of our nuclear expertise and educational materials and other stuff.
What if Thailand decides not to take that path, not to have nuclear power plant in the near future? What would happen to energy security of the country?
If Thailand decides not to, first of all, that's Thailand's decision, and the world would have to respect that. But at the same time, I'd hope that everyone involved in Thailand would say, okay, if we're not going to have nuclear-based load power, what's our plan? and what should the energy mix be, the ideal energy mix be, in order to have that firm baseload power that you don't need intermittent renewables for, right? Of course, you want to max out renewables as much as possible because they're free and they're always there, but you can't run a grid on only renewables, at least not yet until storage gets cheap enough. So I would want to know what is Thailand's plan in the framework of the whole Southeast Asia region to say, are you going to buy hydropower from Laos? Are you going to say, if Indonesia or Malaysia builds nuclear power, will you buy some from them? Is it going to be all carbon trading? And is it going to be sequestration? If you decide not to do nuclear, I want to know what are you going to do?
In this juncture of the world that you see conflicts in so many areas around the world, how do you see the essential of having energy security like nuclear power as national security?
I see this is one bonus, I think, of nuclear power. Because as long as you have the expertise, you have the plants, and if you have the fuel feedstock or cooperation with countries to bring you that fuel, you have a source of power that you can generate on your own. At the same time, if you need each other, you're less likely to fight. This has been kind of a cornerstone of globalization in the world that is breaking down a little bit now, but I hope it gets reversed soon. So I don't recommend that Thailand become 100% self-sufficient, because then there's no need to play nice with the neighbors in terms of cooperation. But at the same time, you don't want to be so dependent on imports that if something happens, if a nearby country has a crazy leader, coming from a country, we have a crazy leader right now.
อีกเรื่องที่น่ากังวลไม่แพ้กันก็คือโรงไฟฟ้านิวเคลียร์กำลังกลายเป็นตัวประกันในสงครามระหว่างรัสเซียยูเครนศาสตราจารย์ไมเคิลช็อตมองว่าการที่รัสเซียบุกยึดโรงไฟฟ้านิวเคลียร์ซาปอริเซียซึ่งเป็นโรงไฟฟ้านิวเคลียร์ที่ใหญ่ที่สุดในยุโรปถือเป็นเรื่องที่เลวร้ายมากแม้ว่าโรงไฟฟ้าแห่งนี้จะหยุดผลิตไฟไปแล้วก็ยังต้องพึ่งพาไฟฟ้าจากภายนอกเพื่อหล่อเลี้ยงระบบหล่อเย็นตลอดเวลาและต้องใช้เครื่องปั่นไฟฉุกเฉินแทนบ่อยๆเพราะสายส่งไฟฟ้าเสียหายจากการสู้รบซึ่งอาจนำไปสู่หายนะนิวเคลียร์ได้ทุกเมื่อ
Russia is using Zaporizhzhia as a horrible political bargaining chip to sow fear, but their goal is to sow fear into Ukrainians to get them to give up. And to Ukraine's, to my great admiration, the Ukrainians are not giving up in the face of these crazy fears, these attacks and takeovers of a nuclear plant. But yes, like any strategic asset, nuclear plants can be used as bargaining chips in politics and in war. Russia's attacking all sorts of power plants in Ukraine to try and cripple their energy security. But when they take over a nuclear plant, you have the lack of power and you have the increased fear. And so they're using that in a pretty dastardly way. I don't think the world's going to forgive them for a century for what they're doing. But yeah, could this happen here? Yes, it could. And that actually could be part of the benefit of smaller reactors, right? Smaller reactors are smaller targets, but they can still be weaponized to put fear into people if everyone's perceived risk of nuclear is higher than the real risk. And that's why public outreach and education is more important than the technology.
จากที่พูดคุยกันมาทั้งหมดดูเหมือนว่าพลังงานนิวเคลียร์เป็นดาบสองคมนะคะด้านหนึ่งหลายคนมองว่าเป็นทางเลือกสำคัญในการรับมือวิกฤตโลกรวนแต่ในอีกด้านหากเราไม่ระวังลืมบทเรียนจากอดีตหรือประเมินความเสี่ยงต่ำเกินไปดาบเล่มนี้ก็อาจจะย้อนกลับมาทำร้ายผู้คนและโลกได้อีกครั้งและคำถามก็คือคนที่ทำงานในสายนี้ต้องเผชิญแรงต้านจากสังคมมากแค่ไหนทำไมอาจารย์คนหนึ่งถึงเลือกอุทิศชีวิตให้การวิจัยนิวเคลียร์มากว่า 25 ปีจนได้รับฉายาว่าวิสาทโปรเฟสเซอร์หรืออาจารย์พ่อมดแห่ง MIT
My lab's full of radiation, lasers, fires, chemicals, high temperatures, low temperatures, big weights, high strain rates, all at the same time. It's like a mad scientist's dream. So the kid that's still in me, I have a 10-year-old, and my wife sometimes says, okay, which one of you is 10 and which one of you is 42, right? We have an expression in my family, men will be boys.
You also talk about anthro-engineering. Can you elaborate a little bit more? What do you mean by that, and what's the implication on nuclear energy with anthro-engineering?
It's not enough just to ask people, what do you want? Or take polls, or do market research. I'm coming over to the opinion that you actually need to do anthropological research, ethnographic research, spending a lot of deep time with people to see how their lives work, their relationship with energy, their relationships with each other, with the governmental and societal structures around them, and the inequities in society, to make sure that whatever solution you come up with, it's not that just it creates more winners than losers, but it absolutely minimizes the fallout to anyone as much as possible. In fact, the number one reason startups fail is they make a product that nobody wants. Number one reason. I believe that if more engineers thought like anthropologists and researched as anthropologists before deciding what to engineer, that statistic would be lower. And that goes for nuclear power too.
So that means recommendation that if you really want to pursue a nuclear power plant, you have to engage with people from the very beginning.
Yep.
By what? By having public knowledge, having public participation, having more discussion.
Yep. And the way we do it in the US, we have years of public hearings. Anyone can come and ask any question of the people who want to do it. And these public hearings can slow down nuclear quite a lot. In fact, they're part of the reason that the cost of nuclear is so high in the US. But I didn't say that was a bad thing. I think it's actually super important that everyone feels heard, and everyone is heard, and everyone has a chance to voice their concerns and maybe come up with something that the people designing the plans hadn't thought about. There's a need to balance the need to hear everyone with the need to be efficient, because if we don't build advanced energy sources, all of our lives will slowly get worse and worse as the temperature goes up and up and the sea levels start to rise, but these are such slow problems. It's really hard for people to intuitively keep track of very long timescale things.
Just wondering, because I can see your passion clearly in nuclear. Why is that? Why someone is dedicated the whole of your life career into studying nuclear particle?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So when I was deciding what to study as an undergraduate, at first I thought electrical engineering because I liked taking things apart and building things. It was just purely selfish. So I thought, what's the root of all the biggest problems in our society? It's energy. And what's wrong with energy right now? Huge pollutants. So it needs to be carbon-free, it needs to be pollutant-free. And at the time in 2001, I thought there's so many people working on wind and solar. They don't need just another person. But nuclear seems to be the most understudied and underdeveloped clean carbon-free source of energy. So I decided that's probably where they need one more mine the most. And that's what I chose. My dream's not that the world relies solely or mostly on nuclear, because I think there's too much risk in that. Not from the danger of nuclear accidents, but from the danger of no energy diversity. So my dream would be that, my son's life is going to be easier than mine. I've been to a lot of polluted places lately. There's days now in Boston where haze comes in from the Canadian wildfires and you can't breathe the air. That never happened when I was a kid. And I want it to get better and not worse for him. And for everyone, it's not just, I want better life for my son. I want better life for him too, but for everybody else too.
จากที่ได้คุยกับ Professor Short ก็เห็นได้นะคะถึงความมุ่งมั่นความตั้งใจอย่างมากในการศึกษาค้นคว้าเกี่ยวกับพลังงานนิวเคลียร์อาจารย์ก็บอกนะคะว่าเข้าใจถึงความรู้สึกของผู้คนที่รู้สึกว่าพลังงานนิวเคลียร์เต็มไปด้วยความเสี่ยงแต่อาจารย์ก็ย้ำนะคะว่าก็คงจะไม่ใช่เรื่องที่จะมานั่งถามว่าพลังงานไหนดีกว่าแบบไหนแต่เป็นหน้าที่ของทั้งภาครัฐภาคเอกชนทุกคนในประเทศที่จะต้องศึกษาไปพร้อมๆกันสร้างการมีส่วนร่วมและสร้างความแตกต่างหลากหลายของแหล่งพลังงานเพื่อที่จะกระจายความเสี่ยงในประเทศด้วยค่ะแต่นิวเคลียร์จะเป็นคำตอบหรือไม่โดยเฉพาะสำหรับประเทศไทยยังเป็นเรื่องที่ต้องพูดคุยและถกเถียงกันอีกยาวนานทีเดียวค่ะทั้งหมดก็คือ The World Dialogue สำหรับวันนี้ค่ะดิฉันณัฐฐา โกมลวาทินสวัสดีค่ะ